promoting and supporting some of the cornerstones of the American experience. It's all about family, faith, and freedom. Now let's get back to the Curtis Report with your host, Barry Curtis.
Thanks. Hey, welcome back to the Curtis Report. Appreciate you being here. Fascinating discussion with a broadcast legend. And in fact, and this guy goes beyond legendary status. I mean, he basically invented what we've come to watch every single night on our news programs. And just a fascinating discussion here. Of course, we're joined with by Al Primo, legendary television news broadcaster. Al, you were talking about how you got started in this business. Bring us up to speed. Basically, this eyewitness news format that you took and expanded to different levels. Kind of give us the deal, because Westinghouse kind of started this concept in 1959. How did that affect you, and what did you do to take and run with this format?
Well, as I say, I was working at KDKA, and I worked there for 12 years and worked in every department, and finally, the opportunity came to become the news director at KYW Television in Philadelphia that Westinghouse owned. And as a good employee, the first thing I did was to look at the union contracts and see what the, rules of the road were there. And a station which had been owned by NBC, which Westinghouse took over, there was a contract that said that anybody that worked in the newsroom and who was a member of the American Federation of Radio and Television Artists, AFTRA, could write, report, and appear on the air without additional compensation. And that was the key. The reason there were no reporters on television, and it was just an anchorman, a weatherman, and a sportsman, was economic. They, the stations had to pay these people, and they had operated like a lot of businesses on, without. They wanted to save money, and the anchorman reading the news to the audience was fine with them. But this lawyer for NBC had put this into the contract, so I checked with our legal department, and I said, does this mean what I think it does? Because if it does, I'm going to start using these reporters on the air. And he said, you can do that. So I interviewed them all and found out their area of interest and expertise, and really created television's first beat system, just like newspapers have beat reporters. And so we had a transportation reporter and a political reporter and a medical reporter, and all of a sudden, within a period of just weeks, these reporters were coming back with, original stories ahead of the newspapers. And we put them on the air, on the set, with the anchor person, and it really elevated their stories, and it elevated their performance because they were sitting right next to the most trusted anchor person in that city. And so that was the beginning of what Eyewitness News became.
And you took
of course,
you took that concept further than that, because what was really interesting in that deal is the makeup of the reporters changed. You reached out to minorities, people whose faces looked a little different than what normally appeared on TV up to that point.
Yeah, I was really proud to say that, I hired the first African-American reporter from Detroit. Her name is Trudy Haynes. That was in Philadelphia. And then I made Marshall Shestak, the anchor woman, on a new program called The Noon News, which was not in existence at the time. And both of these people carried the banner forth in a great way. And KYW became the number one news. Well, one day, I spent 3 years there, and then one day I got a call from ABC Television in New York. And they hired me to become the news director of WABC, Channel 7. And
a legendary station. Legendary station.
Yeah, and I brought the format that I created there, and this time I had a budget. And, I always tell the story about in Philadelphia, you can do pretty much anything and nobody notices because, it's just that's the way it is. Like Broadway shows try out in in Philadelphia because they can make mistakes because nobody notices. So, but in New York, New York is the media central of the world. It's the media center of the universe, and I had a budget, so I could hire a higher caliber reporter, a more experienced reporter, and I got this wonderful inspiration from above. I really do believe it was it. I'm walking down the street, and in the city of New York, there are black people, there are Asian people, there are Jewish people, Italian people, and on the air was only white Anglo-Saxon Protestant men,
right? No
women, and so I started to hire reporters based on their appeal and ethnicity, and I hired Melba Tolliver, a beautiful African-American reporter, and John Johnson, and then I hired the famous Geraldo Rivera, who's still working on television.
Yeah, he's still around, right?
He's doing very well.
You've also had.
I'm very proud of the fact that he and I did this story on Willowbrook, which was a institution of how to take care of mentally challenged people. And it was a very, very
it was a groundbreaking story, groundbreaking investigation. Absolutely.
Yeah, by the result of that story, they really started to really realize how to properly treat these people and release some of them, and
absolutely.
It really is.
But you've
great.
been associated with a number of amazing people: Frank Gifford, Howard Cosell, the great Howard Cosell. And here's what's interesting now. And you were the executive producer of one of my all-time favorites, Harry Reasoner, the late Harry Reasoner.
Yeah.
And this man, Harry Reasoner, was unbelievable. There are two. He did, and you may know this, he did a number of documentaries, but one of them he did called The Hippie Temptation, which was unbelievable. And he did another documentary called Doors, which sounds the most bizarre thing, but he talked about doors for an hour on this documentary. He was a fascinating. Tell me about Harry. I mean, was he?
Well, Harry Reasoner was an exceptionally talented person, and he and I got along just fine, and we together were the first people ever to get into Camp David. All the interviews you see with the presidents at Camp David are done at the helicopter landing spot. No one gets inside, but Gerald Ford was, as you know, took over as president from Richard Nixon and was hoping to get elected to a full term, so I think part of the motivation to let us in for that big exclusive was, politically driven.
Right.
But we did get in there, and we saw all the houses and places where the Khrushchev was spent, and all the gifts that various countries give to the president. Each of these countries, when they come to visit the White House, always bring a present.
Right.
And the one thing that I was very impressed with is the Japanese sent them, and there's a pool inside Camp David with the most exotic fish from Japan, and they're swimming around. But we went through all of that, and sat down and Harry did the interview with President Ford, and it was great. And he is an exceptional writer,
remarkable
writer, and he's a great guy. He's got so much talent, though. I must tell you. I'll tell you an inside story. He can do it on almost automatic pilot. He tends to get a little lazy, and wait to the last minute, and then he, then just pops that script out. And I always said, Harry, if you really tried hard, you could be super great. But we used to laugh about that.
You've gotten everything: the Mark Twain Award, the prestigious Edward R. Murrow Award. Absolutely amazing, legendary in the industry. Running out of time here. Tell us the name of your book and how we can get your book.
Well, I've been blessed with a lot of good fortune, and the name of my book is Eyewitness Newsman. And Eyewitness Newsman is a kind of a documentation of how this whole format came together, where I was, and what things I did, and the people I hired, Geraldo, Tom Snyder, people like that. And it's a nice read. If somebody's interested in the media, this is a behind-the-scenes look at how it all works, and it's available on Amazon, both as hard copy and as electronic copies.
Al Primo. There's one of those. We appreciate you being on the show, and you got to come back and join us.
Happy to do it.
Okay, appreciate that, Al. On the seventh day, God rested and he thought. And on the eighth day, God made radio. We'll see you next week.
Conservative principles and the man who's not afraid to use them.
I can hear you!
Thanks for tuning in. The Curtis Report with Barry Curtis will be back with a fresh take on the week's events and the issues that matter to you.
Free at last! Free at last! Thank God Almighty! We are free at last!
Faith, family, and freedom. Join us right here on your home for The Curtis Report.
The Curtis Report.